It's 5 minutes to 1. Now let's head off to the sale yards, and first up to Greg Tratt with a report on today's Dubbo cattle sale.
As we approach the middle of January, the holiday period appears over with a yarding of 2,385 cattle. The overall quality of the yarding was fairly good, and a big percentage of the cattle from the far western area. The market, with a big lineup of buyers at the rail, has still taken a while to settle down and had a cheaper trend. Vealers to trade orders firm to easier. The best of the vealers 150 to 164. Yearling steers also firm to easier, 143 to 161 too. While yearling heifers 3 to 4 cheaper, 132 to 155. Limited numbers of steers and bullocks and sold on an easier trend. C4s 140 to 155. Cow market fluctuated. Most of the cows 2 to 5 cheaper, and the overfat cows averaged out at 8 cents cheaper. The medium cows were 113 to 125 too. The heavy cows 117 to 128.2. Heavy bulls to 143.2, and most of your feeders are in that 150 to 162 cents. Greg Tratt at Dubbo for the National Livestock Reporting Service.
Thanks for that report, Greg. Next up to David Armitage with a report on today's Armidale cattle sale.
Thanks, Bruce. 1,295 cattle in Armidale. The number's almost back to normal as the season dries off. One of the better yardings for quality this week, with good runs of feeder steers and vealer calves. A few good bullocks and steers and cows, but not too many trade cattle. A bit quieter for most of the cows and bullocks, 3 to 4 cents cheaper the best. Light cows, not much change. Feeder steers firm. Trade cattle firm to just a little bit quieter, and the bulls were back 7 or 8 cents. Light splitter calves were much cheaper, down 25 to 30 cents a kilo. They sold from 182 to 198.6. Trade heifers 154 to 158.4. Feeder steers 148 to 163.2. Restock to 184.8. Medium and heavy cows 118 to 129.6. Bullocks stopped at 159.6, and the top of the bull market 120 to 125 cents. This has been David Armitage for the National Livestock Reporting Service.
Next up to the Over the Hooks report. Good afternoon, Chris Paget.
Good afternoon, Bruce. There have been quite a few changes made to New South Wales over the hook cattle prices as many processors re-evaluate their rates after the break. Although some other states remain closed, the majority of New South Wales works would now have commenced operations and would be attempting to determine the market trends in order to establish their grids. Some grades have seen marginal rises from last year's levels as operations return to normal and retail orders increase. However, with the dollar gaining value and both Argentina and Uruguay re-entering the world cattle trade, it'll be interesting to see which direction export prices head over the coming months. This week, yearling steers range from 260 to 280 cents to average 271 cents a kilogram. Jap ox range from 240 to 290 cents, averaging 272 cents. Lightweight cows range from 185 to 215 cents. Medium weights range from 215 to 280 cents, averaging 251 cents, while heavy cows average 259 cents a kilogram. This is Chris Paget for the National Livestock Reporting Service.
Thanks for that report, Chris. Now to Chris Paget with a report on the Over the Hooks pig sale report.
Good afternoon, Bruce. Decreased retail demand for pork and bacon has seen New South Wales relax over the hook rates this week. This drop was expected as traditionally prices are at their highest in the weeks just prior to Christmas, when demand is at its greatest level. As this domestic demand continues to drop off further, it is expected that prices will follow a downward trend over the coming weeks. Export markets are still described as strong, with many Asian consumers preparing for their Lunar New Year celebrations at the end of this month. This export demand is also expected to relax slightly at the completion of their celebrations. However, the market is certain to remain very strong. There is a possibility, however, that even a slight downturn in export demand may see more export-type pigs remain in Australia, decreasing competition in the domestic market and further lowering prices. This week, DF pork currently averages 284 cents, GI bacon is averaging 256 cents, and back fat of sows over 90 kilograms continue to average 106 cents a kilogram. This is Chris Paget for the National Livestock Reporting Service.
Now to Greg Tratt for the Coonamble cattle sale.
A decrease in buyers with an increase in numbers, 1,550 cattle yarded. The overall quality of the yarding was fairly good, and a few pens of top quality bullocks yarded, and a big percentage of yearling heifers. Competition was not as active as the last sale and did ease as the sale progressed to have a cheaper trend on all grades. Vealers, not many yarded and sold 5 to 8 cents cheaper, 146 to 161.6. Yearling steers to trade and feeder orders averaged out at 7 to 9 easier. They were 148 to 160.4. Yearling heifers not getting the solid competition of the last sale and less orders operating, 6 to 7 cheaper, 136 to 155. Percentage of top quality Hereford bullocks offered, and they were 11 to 12 cents cheaper. The C4 steers and bullocks sold from 140 to 145.2. Handy runner cows yard and also sold to a cheaper trend. They averaged out of 6 to 7 easier. The medium cows were 106 to 124, and the heavy cows were 115 to 122 cents. Greg Tratt from the National Livestock Reporting Service at Coonamble.
Now to Nicole Varley for the Finley cattle sale report.
Good afternoon, Bruce. Well, there's a slightly larger yarding this week, which attracted a few more buyers to Finley. 540 cattle were penned. The quality, however, was well below Finley's usual standard. Price trends were difficult to quote on due to that variability in the stock. Some B-muscled vealers, along with some B-muscled yearling steers, topped the sale at 165 cents. Grown steers were the only grade to secure enough numbers to quote a firm to 1 cent dearer price trend, as there were several runs of well-finished grown steers about, and the best price for the bullocks, 150 cents. Heavy calves to 154 cents. The medium and heavy C and B-muscled yearling steers, 138 to 165. Medium and heavy yearling heifers, 128 to 156 cents. Most were around 133. Those lighter weight bullocks, 144 to 150 cents. And both the beef and dairy cow sales came back by 4 to 6 cents, with the majority of the beef cows weighing over 600 kilos live weight. Best of the Friesian cows to 119, most around $1. Beef cows to 124, and bulls to 135. This is Nicole Varley from the National Livestock Reporting Service at Finley.
And finally to Bev Holloway for the Griffith sheep and lamb sale.
Good afternoon, Bruce. With the mercury at 39 degrees by midday, a very hot day at Griffith. Little effect on lamb numbers, however, as the recent dearer prices almost double last week's small offering for a yarding of 3,300. Quality showed considerable improvement on the medium and heavy trade lambs, while light and store grades remained on the plainer side. Export weights once again limited. Improved quality and extra orders helped prices increase, especially for fresher trade weights. Medium and heavy trades averaged $4 to $6 dearer, while light and store grades struggled to hold firm. Trade orders were the only competition on a few light export weights, however values increased $3 to $4 on a limited quote. 20 to 22 kilo 4 scores, 45 to 48.50, most 200 cents. The best exports to $50.20. 18 to 23 scores, 42 to $48, averaging 211 cents. And the 16 to 18 2 scores, 27 to 33. In the sheep market, just over 2,000 fair quality mutton. Demand weakened slightly, with values firm to 2 cheaper. 18 to 24 kilo ewes was $16 to $21, or 57 to 77 cents, and the weather portion $15 to $23. Bev Holloway for National Livestock Reporting Service, Griffith.
That's the Country Hour. It's news time, 1 o'clock.
To the sale yards now, and first to the Bendigo sheep and lamb sales with Rob Huntington. Good afternoon, Rob.
Good afternoon, Georgia, and everyone. Despite a heavier penning of 11,840 lambs, about 2,000 more, demand was very strong. Most classes overall averaged $4 to $7 a head dearer for both shorn and unshorn lambs, although unshorn lambs were only lightly supplied. There was a big turnout of trade and export buyers, with 2 or 3 extra in the field, competed keenly for a better quality selection of mostly shorn, trade and heavy lambs, although across the yarding quality did range from poor to very good. Light lambs were generally $1 to $2 dearer. Heavy 4-score shorn lambs 49 to a top of 66, heavy first cross to 63.60. Trade 36.40 to 51 and light 22.20 to 35. The best of the unshorn lambs 37 to 58, and most lambs were estimated between 180 to 240 cents. Hog at 26 to 32, and at present 8,500 cheaper being sold. Opening sales $1 to $2 below last week. Rob Huntington, National Livestock Reporting Service.
To the Toowoomba cattle sales now with Iori.
Good afternoon, Georgia. An increased offering at this morning's sale in Toowoomba saw a total of 1,520 head on offer, with the sale still in progress at the time of this report. Overall, the quality is mainly good to average, with a fair percentage of the offering consisting cows and young cattle, with export weights light numbers. With most works now back operating, most buyers are active in today's market. The young cattle sale having just started saw steer calves to restockers reaching 205.2, just a little under last week's price, while certified grain-fed yearling heifers to 170. In the export section, medium weight steers and bullocks have sold to an isolated 165 for certified grain-feds, while other bullocks are sold to 159.8. The best cows have gone to 138, while bulls have made to 138 6 cents a kilo. This has been Iori for the National Livestock Reporting Service.
To Wagga now and Tony Rutter.
Good afternoon, Georgia. Well, cattle numbers rose sharply to 3,770 this week at Wagga, up 900. Quality was very mixed with both finished and feeder types available. The market was mostly 3 to 8 cents cheaper, with the export steers and the cows the worst affected. C4 Vila steers 155 to 163.2, C4 Vila heifers 143 to 156.6, C3 and C4 yearling steers 150 to 157.6, and restockers 150 to 173. Most yearling heifers went to either restockers or the feed, selling from 134 to 159. 400 to 500 kilo steers 148 to 152, 5 to 600 kilo C4 steers 136 to 149.6, they were down 7. Best C4 cows 112 to 122, down 8. D4 cows 106 to 116, down 9. And plain cows 95 to 109, down 7. Tony Rutter, National Livestock Reporting Service in Wagga.
Thanks, Tony. To the Forbes cattle sales now with Bev Holloway. Good afternoon, Bev.
Good afternoon, Georgia. Numbers only marginally higher this week with just over 1,000 cattle. The current heat wave has had little effect on the quality as yet, as most grades remain fair. Feelers, however, are in short supply, as were grown steers. Very early sales started on a firm note for heavy trade and domestic feeders, but weakened quickly for a cheaper trend. No quote for the few milk feelers. Medium to heavy trade steers were 2 to 5 cheaper. Yearling heifers 3 to 6 cents back, with the plainer types recording larger falls. The best of the domestic feeders just 1 cent easier. Heavy and plainer grades 5 to 7 cheaper. Sea mussel feelers 146 to 162 cents. C3 yearling steers 149 to 158. C3 heifers 140 to 158, the D3s 132 to 142, and domestic feeders were 149 to 163. Grown steers back 3 to 5 cents on a limited quote, while 3 and 4 score cows were 2 to 5 cheaper. Over condition 5 and 6 scores back 10 cents. C4 steers 140 to 146, D3 cows 109 to 114, heavy D4s 113 to 129.2. Bev Holloway for the National Livestock Reporting Service, Forbes.
Thanks, Bev. And finally to the Tamworth cattle sales with David Armitage.
Thanks, Georgia. It's hot and very, very dry in Tamworth. 2,200 cattle up by 725 as the weather deteriorates. Some better lines of cattle in a fair quality yarding of mostly yearlings and cows. Only a few bullocks and vealers, but plenty of feeder cattle. Bigger numbers about mostly give a cheaper market, and this was no exception. Feeder steers were 5 to 8 cents cheaper, and the trade and restocked cattle 4 to 6 cents down. Bullocks and heavy steers 10 to 13 cents cheaper. Cows and bulls 8 to 10 cents cheaper, with the same buyers about as last week. Medium feeder steers were 145 to 163.2. Shop vealers 151 to 170. Trade steers 158 to 169.8. Heifers 150 to 170. Best bullocks 142.5 to 151.6. Medium cows 110 to 122, and heavyweights 116 to 127.6. Best bee muscle bulls 138 to 141.2. This has been David Armitage for the National Livestock Reporting Service.
Thanks, David. Well, just briefly before we finish up for this afternoon, the kill figures for last week up significantly after the Christmas period, by 73% to 36,000. Sheep up by 42% with 122,000 killed over the week. Lambs up by 30% to 76,000. And it's time to move to the markets, and first to the Inverell cattle sales with Doug Robson. Hello, Doug.
Good afternoon, Georgia. Very hot and dry here at Inverell, where there was a heavy yarding of 2,570 head of cattle. That's up by 890. Vealers and yearlings were well supplied, as were cows, while steers and bullocks were lightly yarded. Fairly good quality yarding of cattle, with the market easier for most classes of cattle. Vealers lost more ground this week. Heavy C3s 140 to 165.2. Yearling steers to the trade were 13 cents cheaper, 146 to 168 cents. Feeders slightly easier, 150 to 164.6. Yearling heifers lost 8 cents, 140 to 158 cents. All the usual export buyers were back in operation this week. However, bullocks and steers were 10 cents cheaper, 145 to 151.6. Better end of the cow saw little change, while plainer types rated 10 cents cheaper. D4s 115 to 130.2. The D3s 99 to 118, while bulls stopped at 154.2.
To the Gunnedah cattle sales with David Armitage.
Thanks, Georgia. A bit cooler in Gunnedah with 2980 cattle, up by about 500. There were good yearlings and grown steer feeders, but not many veal, cows or bullocks. A lot of the cattle were plain enough too. A very consistent market though, but cheaper, with yearling feeder steers 6 to 7 cents cheaper and the older ones down 7 or 8 cents. Trade cattle were 4 to 5 cents cheaper, bullocks and heavy steers down 7 or 8 cents. Cows 6 or 7 cents cheaper, and the bulls down by 3 and 4 cents. Restocker yearling steers 4 or 5 cents cheaper, but a good demand. Light splitter vealers were 180 to 190. Trade steers 150 to 170. C3 heifers 140 to 154.6. Medium bullocks 142 to 153. Medium cows 113 to 118.2, and heavyweights 122 to 139.2. 159.2 the top of the bull market, and medium feeders 145 to 169.8. This has been David Armitage for the National Livestock Reporting Service.
To Scone and Stan Watson now.
Good afternoon, Georgia. Quite a pleasant day at Scone after a shocking hot day here yesterday. 1,324 cattle yarded, that's down 256 on last sale. A good quality yarding with all the usual buyers in attendance. Splitter calf sold a slightly cheaper rate, stopping at 210 cents. Steer vealer sold firm to 5 cents dearer. Heifer vealer sold 4 cents cheaper, as did yearling steers, while the yearling heifer sold generally unchanged, with feeder cattle fully firm. No cows or steers to quote at this stage, with the sale still in progress. Vealer steers sold from 160 to a top of 180 cents, with heifer vealers selling between 135 and 163 cents. Yearling steers sold generally from 150 to a top of 170, with most sales 160 to 165, with the heifers generally from 145 to 159. Bulls sold at cheaper rates, selling generally from 120 to 132 cents. There's a Stan Watson from the NLRS at Scone.
South now to with the Wodonga cattle sales and Tony Rutter.
Good afternoon, Georgia. Well, cattle numbers remain static at 2,600 this week at Wodonga. The quality was typical for summer, with some well-finished cattle, but also a good many plainer cattle. The market was cheaper, with most young cattle 3 to 5 cents down. Steers and bullocks mostly 7 to 10 cents. Grown heifers 6 cents cheaper. Vealer steers are now in short supply. C3 and C4 vealer steers 154 to 166. Some of these were nearly firm. B and C vealer heifers 136 to 158.6. Most yearling steers went to the feed or restockers 142 to 160.2. C4 yearling heifers 134 to 144. Light C4 steers, not many of these, 145 to 150. They were down 4. Bullocks 134 to 148, down 9 and 10 in places. C4 heifers 122 to 135.2, and 400 to 500 kilo feeder steers 146 to 156.2. Tony Rutter, National Livestock Reporting Service, Wodonga.
And finally now to the Forbes sheep and cattle sales with Bev Holloway. Hello, Bev.
Good afternoon, Georgia. Another very hot day at Forbes with a substantial price rider last week saw numbers double with the draw of 16,000 lambs. Quality, however, managed to improve as a large percentage of good heavy trades and lighter exports were yarded. This and an extra supermarket order offset the larger yarding as the market held up well on the heavier lambs. Most grades over 20 kilos sold firm to $1 dearer. The 16 to 20 kilo grades couldn't quite match the higher values of the previous sale, selling 1 to 2 cheaper. Lighter types remained unchanged, most sales purchased by the trade. Export 4 scores of $49 to $59, most 207 cents. 20 to 22 kilos, 45 to 53.80, averaging 210. 18 to 23 scores, $38 to $51, most 209 cents. And 16 to 18 2 scores, $27 to $34 or $152. And there's 5,500 sheep drawn for, still to be sold. Bev Holloway for the National Livestock Reporting Service, Forbes.
Thanks, Bev. Well, that concludes the Country Hour for this afternoon. Thanks for your company. Hope you can join us at the same time tomorrow between noon and 1 o'clock. Now it's time for the news on your local ABC. It's 1 o'clock. To the sale yards now, and first to the casino cattle sales with Doug Robson.
Good afternoon, Georgia. Another hot day here at Casino where there was a heavy yarding of 2,372 head of cattle. That's down by just 180 on last week's sale. Vealers were once again in good supply, with light weights making up the biggest percentage of the yarding. Producers are offloading calves as feed and water supplies deteriorate in some areas of the north coast. Quality was mixed with a few more plainer calves through the yarding. The big numbers of young cattle coming onto the market saw demand weaken again this week, with best of the light veal 5 to 10 cents cheaper, selling from 175 to 192.2 and averaging around 183 cents. Veal is over 200 kilograms, ranged from 3 to 8 cents cheaper, 146 to 178 cents, with most around 164. Only a few yearling steers, and they topped at 153 cents. Yearling heifers are firm to slightly easier, 141 to 155 cents. There's 650 grown cattle drawn for and still to be sold. Doug Robson, the National Livestock Reporting Service.
Thanks, Doug. And now to the Bathurst cattle sales with Bev Holloway. Good afternoon, Bev.
Good afternoon, Georgia. Cattle numbers down 240 with 1,180 yarded. Unfortunately, quality was also back as a larger percentage of plain, secondary and unfinished cattle were yarded. Milk fillers once again limited with grown steers, generally older grades and few well-shaped cows penned. Increased yardings across the state and plainer quality resulted in prices continuing to slide for all but the best yearlings. Few vealers 5 to 7 cents cheap, although restockers kept the light splitter calves at dearer levels. The best of the yearling steers 2 to 4 down, plainer type 7 to 11 cents cheaper and yearling heifers 3 to 7 back. Feeder orders are restricted to the better end of the yearling steers, keeping these 2 to 3 easier. C muscle feeders 146 to 152 cents, B muscles to 159, C3 yearling steers 152 to 155, and plated D muscles 130 to 140, C3 heifers 135 to 147, domestic feeders 146 to 161. Quality and age reduced grown steers 7 to 10 cents, while cows fell 5 to 11. C4 steers 136 to 145, D3 cows 100 to 116, the heavy 4 scores 111 to 126. Bev Holloway for the National Livestock Reporting Service, Bathurst.
Thanks, Bev. And now to our monthly report from the store sheep sales at Narromine. Good afternoon, Richard Ridge.
Hello, Georgia. It's fine and hot at Narromine. The Yardings about 26,000 sheep. That's up nearly 20,000 on the December numbers. At the time of this report, the first cross ewe sale has just finished and they're about to start on the merinos. About 4,000 young first cross sheep sold. It's a very mixed quality yarding of first cross ewes and quite a few pens of store crossbred mix-sex weaners and crossbred weather weaners. The best of the first cross ewes sold at $62.50. They were March 2000 drop October shorn, very good quality, well grown and fat. And the most of the first cross ewes sold between $40 and $52. The top end of the first cross probably $5 dearer, but the average run selling roughly similar rates to the last sale. Out of condition crossbred mix-sex weaners and mix-sex weather lambs selling from $20 to $32. There's about 18,000 merino ewes yet to be sold and 3,600 wethers. Richard Ridge for the National Livestock Reporting Service at Narromine.
Thanks, Richard. And finally to the Goulburn sheep and lamb sales, where Malcolm Smith joins us on the line and is celebrating or has notched up a rather significant milestone today. Malcolm, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Georgia. Dougie Robson's in the same boat with me.
And what's that boat?
We've both put up here 20 years with the ABC.
Put up with us?
You'd think we would have learned a bit in that time, wouldn't you?
Yeah, well, congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Certainly a pretty good stint on the ABC Country. Malcolm, what happened in the markets today?
Not much good news. Continuing dry weather has forced more stock onto the market. The numbers were up by 4,800, total 15,600. Only 5,000 lambs were included, most woolly lambs showing dryness. Competition was much weaker. The heavy lambs were $2 to $5 cheaper. Heavy woolies topping at $46.60, most $43 and averaging 158 cents a kilogram. Heavy trade $5 to $6 cheaper, selling to $39, most 36 or 143 cents. Medium trade to $35, most $30 or 133 cents. Heavy shorn, a few of them were a little dear, up to $40.20 or 197 cents a kilogram. Medium 3 scores $9 cheaper to $30 or 167. Restockers operated on light lambs but at reduced rates, generally $17 to $23 a head. 10,700 sheep met very irregular competition. Plain sheep down by $7, the very plainest of them unsaleable. And there were 3,300 sheep included in the restricted section. I'm Malcolm Smith of the National Livestock Reporting Service at Goulburn.
Malcolm Smith notching up 20 years with the ABC Country Hour, as is Doug Robson. Congratulations and thanks for your dedication. Where would we be without you? It's news time now. It's 1 o'clock. To the sale yards now, and first to the Dubbo cattle sales with Greg Tratt.
For the size of the yarding, a surprisingly small percentage of trade cattle offered in a penning of 2,100 head. Majority of the cattle were local area cattle. Feeder orders were active and purchased most of the yearling steers. Feelers to the local trade order sold on a firmer trend, 145 to 165 cents. Yearling steers of limited numbers going to trade buyers, 4 to 5 easier, 145 to 158.6. While yearling heifers are not the quality of the last sale, sold on a firm to easier trend, 136 to 148 cents. Handy runner steers and bullocks yard, and with all the export buyers operating, were 2 to 4 cheaper. The C4 steers and bullocks 135 to 152 cents. Cows a fair percentage in the yarding met restricted competition, and they range from 1 to 4 cents cheaper. medium cows 110 to 115.6. The D4 heavy cows 115 to 124.2. Heavy bulls sold at 153.6. Greg Tratt from the National Livestock Reporting Service at Dubbo.
Thanks, Greg. To the Armidale cattle sales now with David Armitage.
Thanks, Georgia. 1,495 cattle in Armidale, with the biggest numbers again in yearlings, cows and the split of vealers. Very similar quality to last week, with most types fairly plain. Was a full complement of buyers this week and a cheaper market for all but a few. Nearly all the young cattle to kill or restock were cheaper. Splitters by 10 cents a kilo, trade and restock by 6 to 8 cents a kilo. Bullocks were scarce but 3 cents cheaper. The best yield cows round about firm, but the plainer type 6 or 7 cents down. Bulls were 4 or 5 cents dearer, with full competition this week. Splitters were 179 to 183 and trade heifers 144 to 153.6. Restock steers 160 to 170. A few bullocks 145 to 155. Light cows 94 to 105. Medium and heavies 110 to 130.2. And the top of the bull market 132 to 141.9. This has been David Armitage for the National Livestock Reporting Service.
Thanks, David. To the results over the hooks with Iori.
Good afternoon, Georgia. This week's Over the Hooks grid has seen cheaper rates for trade cattle, with Majority Works reassessing their new year prices. Overall, after the cheaper trend in trade markets than the previous week's physical sales, decent supply of cattle and slow retail demand combined together has seen this trend a result. The biggest falls were in light splitter vealers, which have come back by 15 cents on average, while yearlings saw little movement. Trade vealers averaged from 280 to 290, with most at 285. Yearling steers 260 to 290, most at 270, with heifers averaging at 267. Despite the rising dollar, export cattle rates increased, while cows and bulls have eased back on last week's rates. Jap ox quotes from 265 to 290, most at 277. EU steers 270 to 310, most at 283. Lightweight cows from 185 to 205, most at 201. Medium weights 220 to 275, most at 243. And heavyweights 230 to 280, most at 253 cents. This has been Aaron Iori for the National Livestock Reporting Service.
Thanks, Aaron. And finally to Wagga and the sheep and lamb sales there. Good afternoon, Tony Rutter.
Good afternoon, Georgia. Well, the high prices of last week encouraged a rise of 5,500 this week at Wagga to a total of 19,500. Unfortunately, most of the increased numbers were plain story types. The actual numbers of good lambs were similar. The market was firm to $1 dearer for heavy trade and light export, while the 18 to 20 kilos were mostly 1 to 2 cheaper, although some of these were firm also. Light trade and store lambs 1 to 2 cheaper. Heavy export 4 scores 55 to 59.40 or 212 a kilo. Light exports 50 to 57.60 or 215, and 20 to 22 kilo 3 scores 45 to $54. 18 to 20 kilo 2 scores 40 to $51, and restock lambs mostly 25 to 33. Tony Rutter, National Livestock Reporting Service in Wagga.
Thanks, Tony. Now to the week in pigs with Chris Paget. Good afternoon, Chris.
Good afternoon, Georgia. Since the end of the Christmas holiday, New South Wales retail demand has decreased dramatically for pork and bacon products. This lack of consumer demand is putting pressure on prices, with a drop in bacon values felt this week. Some feel that last week's poor retail trade is the start of a trend that will see pork and bacon values depreciate further. Export prices remain firm, however some describe the market as entering a period of uneasiness as demand relaxes further with the passing of the Lunar New Year and the strengthening of the Australian dollar. This week DF pork currently averages 284 cents, while GI bacon is averaging 254 cents, which is down 2 cents on last week. There was a cheaper tone across the board at the Gunnedah pig sale yesterday, due mostly to a combination of the recent hot weather and lower consumption levels. Lightweight pork is held at generally firm levels, while heavy pork lost from $8 to $12 a head in places. The best of the bacon pigs sold from firm to $5 a head cheaper, although premium lines were less affected, with odd sales selling to dearer levels. This is Chris Paget for the National Livestock Reporting Service.
Thanks, Chris. To the Coonamble cattle sales now with Greg Tratt.
With no sale next week due to Australia Day, numbers surprised by dropping 910 head for a light penning of only 640 cattle. Quality yarding was fair, very limited supply of veal is yarded and a scattering of most other descriptions. Smaller lineup of buyers present and some not active, with not enough of the right cattle offered to get started on their various orders. The overall market had an easier trend. Veal is 2 to 4 easier, 142 to 156.6. Yearling steers to trade and feeder orders 3 cheaper, 133 to 152.5, while yearling heifers eased by 2 to 5 cents, 133 to 146.6. Export cattle again lacking the competition of the pre-Christmas period, with steers and bullocks 1 to 2 cheaper, C4 steers and bullocks 136 to 144.8. Cows averaged out at 4 cents cheaper. The D3 cows 106 to 114. The D4 heavy cows 115 to 121.6. Greg Tratt from the Coonamble Sale Yards for the National Livestock Reporting Service.
Thanks, Greg. To the Finley cattle sales now with Nicole Varley. Hello, Nicole.
Good afternoon. Well, the number of cattle yarded at Finley remained at similar levels. We had 529. The quality improved as there were several runs of well-bred light and heavyweight steers that were keenly sought after by feedlotters. The light and heavyweight bullocks virtually non-existent. There was the odd supplementary fed steer. The usual buyers attended. However, there was a straw cow and calf market held within the sale. The vealers ranged from 132 to 152 cents, yearling steers 138 to 155, medium and heavy C3 and C4 yearling heifers 128 to 150 cents. The feeder steers, export feeder steers 130 to 147, domestic feeders 140 to 152, and there was a single pen of excellent shaped beef cows offered which made to 122.6, but unfortunately the cow market was generally 3 to 6 cents cheaper. Best of the dairy choppers made to 106 cents, bulls to 126 cents. And the cow and calf packages range from 390 kilograms live weight to 520 kilograms live weight, with 1 to 4 month old calves at foot, and they made between the $690 to $840 per head. This is Nicole Varley from the National Livestock Reporting Service at Finley.
To the Griffith sheep and lamb sales now with Bev Holloway. Hello, Bev.
Good afternoon, Georgia. Lamb numbers are slightly higher this week at 3,970. The quality was generally plainer, with merino cross lambs dominating the numbers. Most grades, however, on the heavier side, although no super exports penned. The market started on a cheaper trend despite an extra buyer in attendance. Competition soon picked up, however, as sales finished 1 to 2 dearer. Light grades in particular sold well, although most grades showed improvement given the plainer yarding. Export fours were $48 to $54.60, most 201 cents. 20 to 22 kilos, 45 to 49.20, averaging 207. The 18 to 23 scores of $38 to $47. In the sheep market, 1,800 fair quality sheep penned at met weaker demand. Medium to heavy grades were 2 to 3 back, plain light sheep down $4. 18 to 24 kilo ewes were 14 to 21.80 or 50 to 63 cents, and odd weather to $16. Bev Holloway for National Livestock Reporting Service, Griffith.
Thanks, Bev. And just briefly, the wool market continued on its climb at the sales in Sydney yesterday. The Eastern market indicator rose 2 cents to 758 cents a kilogram. To the sale yards now and the Bendigo sheep and lamb sales with Rob Huntington. Hello, Rob.
Good afternoon, Georgia and everyone. Hot and sultry here for a heavier penny of 14,652 lambs. Quality good, several good light to extra heavy shorn lambs with a mixture of all other weights and classes. All regular buyers present, most active. Demand remains strong, fully equal to last week's rates, with some sales $1 to $2 dearer, especially in earlier sales. 4 scores heavy shorn lambs 50 to 70. 70 obtained on a couple of occasions. 3 and 4 score trade 36 to 51. 2 and 3 score light 23 to 35.50, and that the same quote generally covered the store type lambs to restockers. Best quality unshorns 43.80 to 54, and most lambs estimated 170 to 240 cents dress weight. And the sale of about 12,000 sheep has just commenced. Rob Huntington, National Livestock Reporting Service.
Thanks, Rob. To the Toowoomba cattle sales now with Aaron Iori.
Good afternoon, Georgia. A similar size yarding to last week in the morning sale at Toowoomba, with 1,568 head in a fairly useful offering. Today's yarding dominated by trade weights in cows, with few steers and bullocks in comparison. At the time of this report, there's been no trade cattle sold. Feeder orders were active, with sales to 164.2, with the smaller numbers seeing medium weight steers sell to an isolated 166.6, with most sales in the 150s. The smaller number of bullocks has seen supplementary fed types to the wholesale meat trade to 163.8, grass-fed export types to 160 cents. A very good offering of cows saw some to 135, with most 3 scores in the late 110s. With a larger offering of bulls, these are sold to 146.6. This has been Aaron Iori for the National Livestock Reporting Service.
Thanks, Aaron. And now to the Wagga cattle sales with Tony Rutter. Good afternoon, Tony.
Good afternoon, Georgia. Well, cattle numbers fell by 1,350 this week at Wagga to 2,420. Quality was mostly plain, with only limited numbers of finished trade cattle available. The market was 2 to 4 cents cheaper in most cases, with just a few grown heifers firm to 1 or 2 dearer, a few lightweight steers 2 or 3 dearer, and some of the feeder steers 2 or 3 dearer also. Best cows were firm to 1 cheaper, plain cows and the very fat cows up to 6 cheaper. C4 vealer steers 156 to 158, C3 and C4 vealer heifers 138 to 154, C4 yearling steers 152 to 156, and the yearling heifers 138 to 147. The light C4 steers 143 to 158, 500 to 600 kilo bullocks 138 to 143. C4 cows 113 to 117. D4 cows 109 to 110. And plain cows 92 to 100. Tony Rutter, National Livestock Reporting Service in Wagga.
Tony, it's now to the Forbes cattle sales with Bev Holloway. Hello, Bev.
Good afternoon, Georgia. As the hot, dry weather continues, numbers increased by 220 for a yarding of 1,220. The yearling steers contain some well-finished lines, although plain and secondary types increased. Heifers were on the plainer side, with cows limited following last week's cheaper rates. Trade competition once again weak as demand at retail level slows. Feedlotters purchased the majority of the yearling steers, with the better bred types just 2 to 3 cheaper, plainer grades 6 to 7 back. A few milk feeders are 5 to 6 cents back, while yearling steers lost 6 to 12 cents, especially on the heavier end. Trade heifers are 4 to 9 cheaper, a very odd pen close to firm. Sea muscle feeders 138 to 155.6, C3 yearling steers 140 to 152, D3 heifers 125 to 136 cents, and domestic feeders are 140 to 162.6. The better end of the heavy cow sold firm on the smaller numbers. The remainder were 2 to 3 cheaper, and grown steers were back 7 to 8 cents. C4 steers 138 to 144, D3 cows 105 to 115, heavy D4s 112 to 124.6. Bev Holloway for the National Livestock Reporting Service, Forbes.
And finally to the Tamworth cattle sales with David Armitage. Good afternoon, David.
Thanks, Georgia. 1,565 cattle in Tamworth. The dry weather isn't helping the quality much. It was mainly plain. Yearlings, light vealers and cows were in the most numbers. No yield much in the heavy steers or the light bullocks. Feeder steers varied a little bit. A pretty stable market though, with vealers, trade yearlings and cows much the same price as last day. Best quality feeders were firm to a cent or two dearer. Plainer types down 2 or 3 cents. A few light yearling bullocks 3 cents cheaper. So were the export heifers and the bulls. Stocker steers, no change much. Splitter cars, 169 to 188.6, and the best veal, 163 to 171.6. Trade steers, 163 to 173. The heifer portion, 151 to 160. Bullocks stopped at 147.6. Medium cows, 106 to 123. Heavies, 117 to 128.6. Top of the bull market, 140. This has been David Armitage for the National Livestock Reporting Service.
Thanks, David. And a brief look at last week's numbers through the sale yards and processors. The cattle yardings and processors were up by 4% to 38,000. Calves up by 7% to 754. Sheep were down by 2% to 120,000. Lambs up by 8% to 82,000.